Hey everyone, Joe here, and this is Casey,
Hey, everybody.
and we're both coming at you from Washington State.
That's right.
And we are ready to dive deep into some car insurance questions with you.
That's right.
Looks like you've been checking out Mid-Columbia Insurance,
Yeah.
and we've heard some good things about them too.
Yeah, Joe, they've been serving Washington since 1995, and all their agents are bilingual, which is awesome.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Especially in Washington.
Especially in Washington.
And they've got all those 5-star reviews, it sounds like. They really know what they're doing.
That's right. And they're an independent agency, so they work with a bunch of different insurance companies.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So they can really find you the best deal.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, looks like your question was about what happens when somebody else drives your car.
Exactly. And that's where this whole permissive use thing comes in.
Permissive use.
Permissive use, yeah. And it's not like a separate policy or anything. It's usually just like a clause in your policy. But not all policies have it, which is important to remember.
Gotcha. So it's like a feature, but not always included.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what does it do?
Well, basically, it lets somebody else drive your car and still be covered.
Okay.
But the thing is, they absolutely have to have your permission to drive it.
Okay.
And that can be like explicit permission, like you hand them the keys and say, go for it.
Right.
Or it can be implied permission.
Implied permission. Now that sounds a little tricky.
Yeah. It can be, think about it like this. Like if your teenager borrows your car to go get milk from the store,
Oh, yeah.
or your roommate needs to pick somebody up from the airport, or your uncle moves your car in the driveway, you know, like to mow the lawn or something.
Right.
It's implied that you gave them permission, even if you didn't actually say, take my car.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay. So how does this whole permissive use thing work with like named drivers versus just like random people borrowing your car?
Yeah, so named drivers are the people who are like officially listed on your policy. Usually like people in your household or people who drive your car regularly.
Gotcha.
And it's super important to have anybody who uses your car a lot actually listed on your policy.
So talk to Mid-Columbia. Make sure they get on there.
Exactly.
All right.
And then for those like one-off situations, you know, like your friend needs to borrow your car for a day or whatever.
Right.
That's where permissive use comes in.
Okay. So that's where it gets kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So not every insurance company offers permissive use, right?
Right. Especially some of the smaller companies might only cover named drivers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's really important to know what your specific policy says.
How do you even know?
That's where checking that fine print comes in.
Right.
And this is where having a good insurance agent is so helpful. They can like break it all down for you.
Right.
And Mid-Columbia is known for explaining things in plain English, so you're not stuck with all that legal jargon.
I like that car insurance whispers.
That's right.
Okay. So let's say somebody borrows my car, with my permission, of course,
Of course.
and they get into an accident, knock on wood.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Well, in most cases, the person driving your car would be covered by your insurance,
Okay.
up to the same limits and types of coverage that you have.
Okay.
So like if you have liability coverage, collision coverage, comprehensive, all of that would extend to them too.
So like if Washington requires like, I think it's like $25,000 in property damage liability or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And my friend borrows my car and causes $20,000 worth of damage.
Right.
My insurance would cover that.
Yeah, exactly, because that 25,000 limit applies to anybody who's driving your car with permission.
Okay.
They don't get like a lower amount of coverage or anything.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay, so how do I know when somebody should just be a permissive user or when I need to actually add them to my policies like as a named driver?
Good question. So basically, if someone just borrows your car every once in a while,
Okay.
like maybe 12 times a year or less, then they're probably fine under permissive use. But if they're using your car more regularly than that, like they're doing a weekly carpool or something,
Right.
then you definitely need to add them to your policy
As a named driver.
as a named driver.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a frequency thing?
Pretty much.
Okay. And of course, if you're ever unsure, just call up your insurance agent.
Exactly. They can help you figure it out.
Right. They know all the details.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about when somebody drives your car without your permission?
Ooh, yeah, that's a whole different story.
That's like stolen car territory, right?
Exactly. And that's called non-permissive use.
Okay.
And in most cases, your insurance is not going to cover damages if somebody steals your car.
Okay.
So, yeah, always make sure that anybody who's driving your car has your permission.
Even if it's just like a quick run to the store?
Even if it's just a quick run to the store, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're not covered.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what about family members?
Family members, yeah, that can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, because, like, what if my brother borrows my car to help me move or something?
Yeah, so if your brother doesn't live with you and it's just like a one-time thing,
Oh,
then
yeah.
he'd probably be covered under permissive use.
Okay.
But if you have family members who live in your house,
Okay.
especially teenagers,
Right.
you definitely need to add them to your policy as named drivers,
Okay, just to be safe.
just to be safe.
Yeah. Okay, so just to recap for our listener out there,
Yeah,
permissive use is great for those occasional situations when somebody needs to borrow your car.
exactly.
But remember, not every policy includes it,
Right,
and there are limits to how often it applies.
definitely.
So, and also, implied permission can cover a lot of situations, but it's always best to be really clear about who's driving your car and when.
Absolutely. You don't want any surprises
No.
when it comes to insurance.
Nope. So what do you think, Casey? Is there anything else we should cover about permissive use before we move on?
You know what, Joe? We've talked a lot about letting other people drive our cars, but what about when we're the ones borrowing somebody else's ride?
Oh, that's a good point.
You know what, Joe? We've talked a lot about letting other people drive our cars, but what about when we're the ones borrowing somebody else's ride?
Well, that's a good point. I've definitely borrowed a friend's truck before without even thinking about the insurance.
Yeah, it's easy to assume that if they have insurance, we're good to go,
Right.
but it's not always that simple.
Right. Like, what if their policy doesn't have that permissive use thing?
Exactly. Or what if there are like restrictions on who can drive it or how often?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
So let's say you borrow your friend's car to help him move, or you're going on a road trip together
Okay.
and you get into an accident.
Oh, man. I don't even want to think about it.
I know, but it's important to be prepared, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So the first thing to know is that your friend's insurance is what's called primary,
Okay.
which means their policy is going to be the first one to pay out on any claims.
So their insurance takes the first hit.
Pretty much.
Okay. But what if the damages are like way more than their coverage limits?
That's where your own insurance might kick in,
Okay.
but only if you have the right coverage.
So this is where having something like uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage is super important.
Exactly, because that can help fill in the gaps if your friend's insurance isn't enough.
Man, it's like a safety net within a safety net.
It really is, and this is another great example of why it's so important to talk to your insurance agent.
Right. And make sure you really understand your coverage,
Exactly.
whether you're driving your car or somebody else's.
That's right. And speaking of agents you can trust, let's circle back to Mid-Columbia for a sec.
Yeah.
Remember all those 5-star reviews?
Yeah. People seem to really love them.
They do, and it's because their agents are so good at explaining things and helping you find the right coverage.
Plus, they're independent, so they can compare rates from a bunch of different companies.
Exactly. It's like having a personal shopper for car insurance.
I like that.
They do all the work for you.
That's awesome. And it's especially helpful if you have like a complicated driving history.
Oh, for sure.
Like we said earlier, Mid-Columbia works with folks who've had tickets or accidents, even DUIs or suspended licenses.
Right. They get that life happens.
Yeah.
And they're committed to finding a solution for everybody.
That's great. So if you're in Washington and need car insurance, definitely give them a call.
Yeah, they have a great reputation for a reason.
All right. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I think it's time for another one of those thought-provoking questions.
Ooh, I love it. Hit me.
Okay. So think back to all those times you've borrowed a friend's car.
Okay.
Did you ever stop to think about whether you were actually covered under their insurance?
That's a good one. I know I haven't always.
Yeah, it's easy to just assume everything's fine.
Exactly. But as we've learned, assumptions can be risky when it comes to insurance.
Right. So be proactive, ask questions, make sure you understand your coverage and the coverage of whoever's car you're driving.
Absolutely. It's all about being informed and responsible.
Well said. All right. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Are you ready to move on?
I think so. What do you say we talk about?
Man, this whole permissive use thing has really got me thinking.
Me too, Joe. It's definitely one of those things you don't really think about until it's too late.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, hopefully our listener out there is feeling a lot more informed now.
I hope so too, Joe.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
You know, what is permissive use, who it covers, when you might need to add a driver to your policy, what happens when you borrow someone else's car, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And I think the biggest takeaway here is to just really understand your own car insurance policy.
Right. Don't just assume you're covered for everything.
Exactly.
Read that fine print Ask your agent questions and make sure you're getting the protection you need.
And don't be afraid to shop around, too.
Right.
Remember, Mid-Columbia is an independent agency, so
Right.
they can help you compare different policies and find the one that's right for you,
Yeah.
whether it's with them or another company. Right.
The important thing is to find an agent you trust.
Yeah.
Someone who'll take the time to explain things and answer all your questions.
It's like having a car insurance advocate on your side.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. And remember, when it comes to car insurance, knowledge is power.